Okay, I'm assuming that we're live, right, Annie? Yes?
Yep, we're live.
So investigation with Dr. T was
No, it's not. I don't think so, Annie. We're not live.
On YouTube?
Because I'm actually looking on YouTube. Oh, live, right? Oh, there we go. There we go. Yes. Okay. Excellent. All right. Sorry. Here we go.
So investigation with Dr. T was the brainchild of our dean, Dr. Kimberly Durham. She said, "Do you think that you could do some type of an ongoing podcast about criminal justice?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, definitely." And so that's sort of how it all started. So I thought that this year, what I would do is sort of call it the empowerment season. I really want to highlight and validate these folks who have turned their lives around. For the last season, we had on folks like Gregory Boyle from Homeboy Industries. He's a Jesuit priest who runs the largest gang rehabilitation program in the country. Let's look at folks who have actually succeeded at Homeboy, for example, and have a homeboy and a homegirl come on the show and talk about their experiences being in a gang. What was that like? What attracted them to Homeboy? And how has their lives changed and turned around as a result of it? This is really awesome. Justice restored, life after exoneration. And so I have an exoneree coming on, Willie McDonald. Willie was incarcerated wrongfully. I want to really zero in on what was that like for Willie. Dr. Barry Ryman, who is the clinical director at Recovery Unplugged, and Richie Supa, who is a former band member of Aerosmith. And have them both come on, talk about addiction and talk about music. He's going to talk about how music as a modality can really be effective in helping addicts fight addiction. And of course, we're going to have student spotlight, former alum, etc., on some really cool and interesting topics. We are going to bring back Unfound Ed Denzel, most definitely. This season of empowerment, like the gangs, former gang members, former folks who are incarcerated, and folks who struggle with addiction. I think that those are just like really important for folks to hear, and our students to hear, and even our faculty to hear.
So we want to just make sure that people know that this the topic tonight might trigger some feelings for folks, and we want to make sure that they have support if they need it. We're talking tonight with Eddie Fordham, Dominique McGlory. Eddie Foreman, from incarceration to inspiration. Eddie Foreman's journey is a testament to the power of transformation. And that's what this season is about. This season is about empowerment, transformation, reimagining ourselves. After serving 31 years, 2 months, and 8 days in Florida prisons, he emerged not just redeemed, but empowered to guide others away from the path that he once walked. Released in 2022, he became a Florida Attorney General's National Crime Prevention Conference speaker, sharing his positive message, choose your friends wisely, and has led thousands of youths away from trouble. He approached his time in prison like a college student pursuing a degree, and he earned 4.0 grade point average, making the dean's list and becoming Florida's first incarcerated college student awarded a prestigious academic excellence award from Miami-Dade College. And Dominique McGlory, arrested at the age of 19, sent to prison for 15 years. Although his incarceration was a devastating and traumatic experience for him and his family, it doesn't define who he is. In 2023, he was selected to participate in a Second Chance program at Miami-Dade College. That is the program that we're going to be centering and focusing on tonight. That was Samantha Carlo. Professor Carlo is going to be on as well. She runs the program at Miami-Dade College. And he graduated with his Associate of Arts degree. Annie, can you do me a favor? Just finish reading the bio for Dominique.
So he graduated with his Associate of Arts degree in 2024 and was released from prison a month later. He says, "It's not over. My journey is just beginning. I can't wait to share my story and continue on my path to success by finishing school and earning his bachelor's degree."
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you for doing that, for reading that for us. And so I want to bring the guests on. You know, when you have a little dog, Jack Russell, really cute, pain in the neck. So anyway, I had to put her in another room. Okay. So Samantha Carlo, Professor Carlo, come on down. Can you come? Can you share your screen with us? Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. We're going to spotlight you, add the spotlight. First, I want to talk to you, Professor Carlo. We go back a long, long time. We met each other at American Intercontinental University, I think it was. And that was a long time ago. That had to be 20 years ago, right?
2005.
2005. So 19 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And when did you start? I know it's through a Pell Grant, right?
Right.
Second Chances Through Education. Can you talk a little bit about like how it all happened and how it unfolded for you?
Sure. Well, I went into my first prison in 1996 as an undergraduate student. I was selected to participate in a psychosocial program called a SUBA, which is the word abuse in reverse. And so we worked with individuals who were incarcerated on a curriculum about reversing the effects of abuse. I had no idea at that moment when I walked into that prison, I think I was maybe 19, that I would end up spending a lot more time in prison working on programming. But when I first stepped into this prison, and it was in the Panhandle in Florida, I think just me coming from a position of privilege, walking into this space, thinking, this is not what society thinks about prisons, right? Like, I think people have the perception that when someone goes to prison, that's where they go, they're going to get help, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for them to reform themselves, and then they should come out and they should be perfect and ready to contribute. But prisons are not that, and have not been that for a long time. They're very dark spaces. And I just think that I was naive in thinking that prisons would do what society thinks that they should do. So I did that program for a few semesters, just always thinking like, this is not how we make people better, right? Sending people to prison, whether it's for a year or 30 years, like in Eddie's case, that's not going to make people better.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
They are spaces of deprivation. They are dark spaces. And I'm not someone who's been incarcerated. It's just me observing. There's just a culture. There's an us against them culture. And so there's just this structured conflict that exists between officers and those who are incarcerated. And I think even the most well-intentioned officers, you know, this culture that exists, it's dehumanizing. And if you treat people a certain way for a certain period of time, there can only be, I think, negative consequences associated with that, even with, and you'll meet Dominique and you'll meet Eddie, great human spirits, but I'm sure that they could share there were some really dark times being incarcerated. So I didn't know what I was going to do. But fast forward, to not make a long story longer, I was hired at Miami-Dade College in 2006 as faculty in the School of Justice. And I had inquired if we are doing anything inside prisons in Florida. And I was told no. And I'm like, well, we're the largest college in the country, and we have one of the largest correctional populations in the state of Florida. How are we not doing something? And so it took some time. I think in 2013 is when I first entered prisons to run the ASUBA program for Miami-Dade College. And almost immediately, I met people like Eddie and other students and realized that that was not enough, that they were hungry for a lot more. And so it kind of just like took a little journey researching higher ed in prison, realizing lots of obstacles, a ban on federal funding for financial aid, very prohibitive laws in Florida when we're talking about residency for state tuition purposes. And so from 2013 to 2021, which is when we launched, I kind of just pursued the path, not on a full-time basis, but just always promoting what could be. And so eventually the federal government did an experimental site initiative under Obama's administration, where they would allow colleges to receive Pell Grants on behalf of incarcerated students. We applied in 2015, Miami-Dade. We were not selected, but we applied again in 2019 and found out in 2020 that we were selected. And so we launched our first cohort in January 2021. And now we're on cohort 4 at Everglades Correctional Institution and cohort 2 at Everglades Correctional Reentry Center.
Great. Phenomenal. It's phenomenal work. It's phenomenal work. And, and it's really what impresses me the most is that even though you had some obstacles like state rules, if you will, I don't want to call them laws.
They are laws. It's codified. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I always think of a law as a good thing, not a bad thing. Right. So, I mean, it sounds like there's not a lot of resources, and it sounds like the state is not actually in a supportive role for ex-offenders. Is that true?
So I will say there are very well-intentioned people in the Florida Department of Corrections who partner with us and are phenomenal. I would say just the overall culture, though, in corrections, they have a specific mission, right? And that's care, custody, control, and it conflicts with the mission of an institution of higher education. And so we have, it's not combative, it's just, we're always being reminded it's security first. This is not a college, right? So, but overall, I think Florida has a very punitive stance on people who are in prison and label those individuals who are not deserving of things like this. Yes. And you'll hear people say, well, my daughter can't go to college, right? But we're going to let people in prison go to college. And so it's like, I don't know. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both, right? Like we don't have to other people and put people down. Everybody, there's enough for everybody.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
So look, I want to bring on Eddie and Dominique, and we'll come back to you. I'm not going to spotlight you. I'm going to spotlight as soon as Eddie and Dominique share their video, I will add their spotlight. And so Dominique and Eddie Fordham, I'm so happy that you're on this show with me. And, really, you guys actually kick off the empowerment series now. And I'm just so thrilled. And I don't want to do a lot of talking because I want to hear it from you. So let's maybe we start with Dominique, if that's all right. Eddie, we'll start with Dominique. Dominique, if you want to tell us a little bit about you, and I'm going to throw some questions out, like mostly about what was it like in there, and what did Second Chances Through Education do for you?
First, I want to thank you, Dr. T, for allowing me to be on the webinar.
Of course.
I never thought in a million years I'll be on a webinar discussing my experience in one of the darkest moments of my life. But yes, man, faith and support is what gets you through in prison. And it's helped me in my experience. And it's helped me be a better person, and for me to obtain something that I never thought I'd be able to achieve. My name is Dominique. As you guys know, I'm from Miami, Florida, preferably down south Richmond Heights. And the whole prison experience, man, is is traumatizing. It's traumatizing. If you're not a strong-willed person, it's very hard for you to cope. And support is not given always from staff and from other inmates. And I'm just grateful to come up out of the situation.
So you were released pretty recently, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about, what was that like to be released and back into society, and how much did second chances through education help you in that transition?
Well, I tell everybody Apple Pay changed my life. After doing 15 and coming home and using Apple Pay, just boop with your phone, it changed my life. But second chance, the education through Miami-Dade actually helped me transition back into society the best way ever. I was able to get back acclimated with technology. I was able to figure out things that I didn't know before, far as bank accounts, credit, financial literacy, things of that nature. Just getting back acclimated back in society. The knowledge of the coursework, it definitely played a pivotal part.
Okay. What was it like for you? You mentioned faith. It was very important to you.
Yes, ma'am.
So what else? Were there other programs or other things that that got you through this very dark night?
Actually, at the reentry center that I was at Everglades Reentry, they do offer other programs such as like Thinking for a Change. It helps you to think a little bit better on a different scale. But faith, for me, faith was everything. But as you know, as the Bible says, faith without works is dead. So with the faith, you have to believe in self. And that's what the second chance program helped me do. Actually believe in myself that I could succeed and that I could accomplish something that I felt like was greater than me. So with faith, you get it. You get an awesome man. I'm just striving for greatness and trying to be the best man I can be.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. And this is a big start, right? Being a guest on this criminal justice podcast, and being highlighted and showcased, because, and I'm going to ask Eddie to please come and join us now. All he's got to do is share his camera, and then I'm going to spotlight him too. So, Eddie, as soon as you can, just turn your camera on. No, Dominique, keep your camera on.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Don't go anywhere. Eddie, I don't know what happened.
Uh-oh.
All right. Well, I'll talk. I'll vamp a little bit. If you look at these statistics, if you look at the data, right, they always have these longitudinal studies that they do through the Bureau of Prisons, and they follow folks who were released from being incarcerated, and they follow them. Well, they're following them not just for a study. They're following them because they're on parole, right? So, or they're under some type of community supervision, and so what we know from these really big studies that they've done, I mean, real big quantitative longitudinal studies. There's Eddie. Okay, hey, you scared me, man. You scared me. All right, there's Eddie. But what I wanted to tell you is that it's like close to 70%. At some point, there's going to be reoffending that happens, whether that be parole violation, whether that be different crime, whether that be same crime. And of course, over time, the longer the time, sort of the more likely there is to reoffend, right? And this is what makes up recidivism rates. So when criminal justice students, or anybody for that matter, are talking about rehabilitation, talking about corrections, which is supposed to be correcting behavior. We find that only like 30%, a very small percentage, make it. Very small percentage re-enter successfully. We see the same thing with addiction. We see that it's not easy. It's not easy to be in recovery, stay in recovery, not relapse. But the truth of the matter is that it's few, many are called, few are chosen. Let's put it that way. And for a vast number of reasons. So Eddie, can you talk to us a little bit about, you've been out now for a while, right?
Yes, I was released in April of 2022.
And so what has it been like for you these last 3 years? Because, we talk about this all the time in our criminal justice classes, that, when you go to apply for a job, the first question they're asking you is, were you ever arrested? And so there's this stigma, this labeling that, you can't break out of. What was it like for you?
Well, before I get to that, Dr. T, let me just kind of give some context and some background as to how long I was incarcerated, if that's okay.
Yeah, you're in charge.
Okay. I went in when I was 18 years old in 1991. I was sentenced to life in prison, and I ended up serving 31 years, 2 months, and 8 days in 17 maximum security prisons across the state of Florida. For me, education actually became my redemption. When I went in, I was lacking the last class that I needed to get my high school diploma because I was arrested during my senior year of high school. And while I was incarcerated, I was told that I was not going to be able to complete that high school diploma, but that I could get an alternative diploma, a general education. And I said, well, there's people that have long-term medical issues or whatever, and they're gone from their schools for a long time. How are they able to get their high school diplomas? And they said, well, they do it through correspondence. And I was like, well, if they can do it through correspondence, why can't I? And they're like, because you're in prison. And I took, that was like a no, but I didn't let that no stop me from pursuing my education at the age of 18. And so I sat down and I wrote a letter to the superintendent of schools in Escambia County and to my old principal, and they made a correspondence plan that if I took a distance education class from the University of Florida in English 4 and I passed it, they would confer upon me my Escambia High School diploma. And so that little bit of the struggle there for my education made me realize and value just how important education really is to my personal change process. And then I read an article in a newspaper that our then Governor Lawton Chiles was writing letters to students who had graduated. And I said, I want one of those letters too. I'm a graduate. I'm a high school graduate. And so I wrote a letter to the governor and I asked him, I said, I would like to have this letter, sir, not just for me, but I would like for you to address it to my parents, because when I made the poor decisions that led me to prison, I was also affecting my mom and dad. And it's called the ripple effect, as you probably know. They're the indirect victims of my crime. And so I wanted them to feel some pride in that. And Governor Lawton Chiles wrote that letter to my mom and dad, and he encouraged me to pursue a higher education. It was shortly thereafter, about a year, that Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decided to take away the Pell Grant funding for state incarcerated college students. This was in 1994 during a crime bill. And I literally watched our professors in the schools, in the incarcerated schools, packing their milk crates and crying. And I thought, well, maybe they're crying because they don't know where they're going to get their next job or whatever. And they actually said, that they were crying for us because they didn't know what would happen to us without education behind bars. And so for over the next 20 years, there was no Pell Grant funding for schools like Miami-Dade College to bring us higher education in prison. And just like Professor Carlo said, they had a pilot program, and I was able to get into that pilot program, but was almost not allowed because in the state of Florida, there is a law, and it is a law, and it says you can live in Florida your entire life and be a resident of Florida, but when you get incarcerated and you want to go to this college program, you have to pay out-of-state tuition. Not in-state, but out-of-state tuition. That makes it literally impossible for probably 99% of the people who are incarcerated to pursue change, to pursue a higher education while they're sitting in prison.
Yeah.
Now
But
we know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Just gonna just interject for a second and then ask Dominique to weigh in on this as well. So, there's this sentiment that you do the crime, you do the time. You've heard that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that there's consequences, and we're not supposed to make it easier. And there's all of this notion of just desserts, and payback and making you pay. How do we change that? How do we change that? How do we change that sentiment? Dominique, what was your experience with any of that? And kind of like how you're reacting or interacting with folks who have that idea in their head that because you were arrested, first of all, just because you were arrested doesn't mean that you were guilty, right? So we know that. But and there's so much complication and so many layers of variables here, making this not a very simple thing of why does someone get involved in crime at all, even. I mean, and there's so much to that, right? But Dominique, what do you think about what Eddie has said? And in terms of like folks who have this sentiment that is antithetical to what Professor Carlo and I believe, which is second chances.
Sadly to say, it's what have you done for me lately? Is a lot of people, the stigma and the narrative of a prisoner or an inmate has already been given to society. So I really feel like it's on the individuals, like the lovely Professor Carlo. When she went into a prison, or when she went to prison, she seen that it was a dark place and that nobody really cared. So that's the how should I say it? That is the reason to believe why certain people act the way they act. But it still is on the individual. We have to believe in ourselves, and you have to have structure in self, and you have to know what you want. And education is just the catalyst. That's just it's minute, but you have to be able to get to that place where you want to receive that. And once you receive the education, then you can change the narrative. And that's when we start changing minds and changing the idea and the stigma of inmates. They're nothing but CDL and truck drivers and HVAC electricians. We need to get into the stigma of inmate can be a lawyer, or an inmate can be a physical therapist, or an inmate can be a doctor. I think that's but it all starts with us first. It all starts with the individual, with the incarcerated.
Right. And I love that you said it starts with the individual. And then one of you, it was either Eddie or you, Dominique, that said something about change. And I love whatever that term was that you used. Can you say it again? Was it you, Eddie? Did you say it? Something about change, like this change factor.
When the change process takes place, for
Yeah.
me was through education.
Yes.
And I want to say something too, you know, we've been throwing around this word inmate, right? But the truth of the matter is that inmate is a label.
Yes.
And we are, yes, we are. I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I'd never refer to myself as an inmate, a convict, an ex-convict, a prisoner, an ex-prisoner, a felon, an ex-felon. Those are all master labels. And those are labels that were given to us by people who controlled the game. All right. We, like my brother Dominique said, is that we own this narrative. These were our lives. They were also our poor decisions. So we're in charge of our own change process, which means that we are in charge of our narrative. And now there are some people that would not change their narrative, and that's why we have prisons. Okay. But they're not inmates, they're incarcerated people. And
Yeah.
until we begin to think of people as people, we're always going to treat them as inmates or prisoners. And I'm so glad for people like Professor Carlo and you, Dr. T, and Dr. Minka Brantley, because they believe in the power of the human being to change and to outgrow, like rise like a phoenix out of their own ashes.
Yes.
And when Congress reversed its decision to take away the Pell Grant funding and they brought it back, that's why they called it the Second Chance Pell Grant. Now, I'm not, again, here we go back to labels again. All right. I don't think this is a second chance for a lot of people. I think for a lot of people, it's a first chance. It's a first opportunity. And so these are opportunity grants for people who are accountable, people
Yes.
who are responsible and know that we've made poor decisions in our lives and are ready to rejoin society in a way that we can contribute.
Excellent. Excellent. Professor Carlo, you got to weigh in on any of the discussion, anything that we've said so far, whether it be stigma, labeling. I love what you just now said, Eddie, about, you know, is first chances really in many cases. And also the emphasis is on persons, individuals, you know, not the label. And you use a term master label, which is that's a whole nother show. Okay. So Professor Carlo, weigh in, would you? Thanks.
Sure. Well, first, I'm so proud because I feel like they're my children. They might be older. I don't know. We won't talk about age, but super proud because they're exemplifying exactly why we do what we do. People in society, if they're not directly impacted by incarceration of a loved one, they don't understand that these are human beings, or they don't think about the fact that these are human beings that are being removed from society. The punishment is that removal. It's not everything else that we can throw on top of people to break their human spirit, right? I also just want to tell an anecdote. Like, our students in our classes refer to themselves as inmates in the very beginning, and we were adamant and calling them students and telling them that they're going to get in trouble if they continue to refer to themselves as inmates, because they are students. And even when I have like an encounter with a staff in the prison or even the warden, and I think it's just become common practice to use this word inmate, but I tell the warden, oh, you mean my students? And so the warden will giggle, right? And realize that it's a complete paradigm shift that has to take place amongst all practitioners in order to start looking at people differently who are, or not treating people differently who are incarcerated. So I'm super proud. I mean, really, really proud, because this it's hard work to create a college campus in a prison. And right now we're doing it in 2 prisons. And people, I don't think, understand all the behind the scenes navigating through 2, well, really 3 large bureaucracies, right? It's the college bureaucracy, and I have wonderful administrators from the top all the way down, super supportive of this program, are always saying yes, right? When I'm like, oh, I'm going to try and ask for this now. And then even the Florida Department of Corrections that makes every effort to allow us to provide as equitable an experience in the classroom for our students in prison as on the outside. There definitely are some limitations, but then we're also navigating the Federal Department of Education, right? Because they're the ones who are funding this. So all of our students in our classes have to complete FAFSAs. They don't have access to technology. So any student here logged in, watching this, you log in online and you complete your FAFSA. Like, we physically have to carry every single piece of paper into the prison and kind of act as that conduit between the student and the outside world. So it's challenging to get even one student their Florida residency established, them admitted to the college, financial aid acquired. I mean, it takes a good year to develop a cohort of 20 students. So it is a labor of love. But I'm super proud. And when I feel overwhelmed or like probably walk into the prison once a month and say I quit, right? And my students are like, no, you can't. Then, you know, you just go, you meet with your students and they reinvigorate you and show you why you have to keep fighting for this, because we can't treat people as throwaway people. We've all made mistakes.
Right.
And like Eddie's shirt says, like, we should not be defined by the worst thing that we've ever done. And if society takes that approach, I mean, we're talking about tens of millions of people who have a felony conviction in this country, right? And so if we take that approach that we never let them move past their choices or their indiscretions, then what are we saying about us, right? Like, just a whole segment of society should just like lay down and never try.
Right.
So I'm really proud.
Thank you. You have a lot to be proud of.
Yeah.
And I know how hard you work at this, and I know that, you know, you walk the walk. You don't, I watch your feet. I don't watch your mouth. And I see the work that you're doing, and it's just beautiful and it's wonderful and it's life changing and life affirming. And it's exactly what I want to share this quote with you both, with all of you. And let me just make that big. So can everybody see that? I love this quote from Father Boyle. He's the founder and leader of Homeboy Industries. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Homeboy Industries at all. It's the largest gang rehabilitation organization, nonprofit in the country, if not the world. I love this quote. He talks about kinship, right? Because he's talking about human beings. We're human beings first and foremost. We're individuals, we're persons, right? We're not the label. We're not the addict. We're not the inmate, just like you said. And so he says, inching ourselves closer to creating a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. And we imagine with God this circle of compassion. And then we imagine that no one's standing on the outside of the circle. And we move ourselves closer to the margins so that the margins themselves will be erased. We stand with those whose dignity have been denied, and we locate ourselves with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And so at the edges, we join the easily despised and the readily left out. We stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And we situate ourselves right next to the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. Anybody want to weigh in on that? Dominique, you want to weigh in?
That was powerful. That was powerful. And I know I've firsthand experience when you said homeboy. You know, I'm not in the gang. I never was. I know brothers and individuals that wanted me to come home. That means to, you know, be gang initiated. And I know the mindset of those individuals. And coming from coming from a brother that was in that type of field or that type of realm, you know, that's very powerful. And the narrative has to change. The narrative has to change. I mean, it's already changing. Donald Trump. But it needs to be changed in a way that is more positive and we need to cut stigmas. I mean, that's the thing. Education is the key. Education is the key. That is the goal. That is the yellow brick road
Yes.
to success.
Yeah.
And
you say the yellow brick road is really funny because, you know, when you look at the Wizard of Oz, I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but you know, Scarecrow, you know, at the end, he's if I only had a brain, you know,
had a brain.
And then he gets this like degree at the end, and they hand it to him. And I always think of that myself. You know, I have a GED. I don't know if how many people know that. I'm going to disclose that publicly right now. But, you know, I have a PhD, but it started with a GED. Like that was my first three letters were GED. And for whatever the reason, it doesn't even matter. It's not important. What is important is that I never allowed anyone to define me. And in fact, with like resentment, I will definitely be an achiever now. You know, I'm going to go all the way. I'm going to go all the way to PhD. But what happens to me sometimes is when I'm sitting in a room, right, with other folks who have a lot of education, that GED stigma, it like pops up like a shadow.
Right.
And I don't know if you guys feel that way or if you experienced that, Eddie. If you wanted to weigh in on Gregory Boyle's quote or anything that I'm adding now, or anything that Dominique said that you'd like to weigh in on, go ahead.
Thank you. That's a very powerful quote. And, you know, books and literature, you know, reading quotes like that were always motivational and inspirational for me. And I remember one of the first books that really made me think deep about myself and about my change process was a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp, and his conditions around him were far worse than what I or Dominique or anyone could have ever experienced. And yet in this little book, he says that when you can no longer change a situation, the only thing left you have to change is yourself. And that the last of the human freedoms is the freedom to choose one's own way. And so when we first started talking, you had asked me, you know, you said, Eddie, you've been out for a few years. What has your transition been like? And for me, my transition has been like being the person who walks out to the margins, like Father Boyle says, and to make time and be present with people that are living in those spaces and holding their hand and saying, listen, there's help, there's assistance, there is a way, but each individual has that freedom to choose. But once you choose that way, it's important that as a society that we are providing the tools and that we're providing the pathway or the yellow brick road or whatever you want to call it, so that we have access to those resources. Now, when we have laws like this residency law that makes it almost impossible for people who are incarcerated to take advantage of the education, then that as a society, we need to rethink that. And part of my transition has been, I went into a transition home and I had supports that were around me. I was given a job by Feeding Tampa Bay, which is a opportunity employer. I worked with them for a year and a half. I was promoted while I was working there. Of course, as you know, I went back to college, and education opened up many more doors for me. During this time, I realized it was important for me to also pave the way and give back to others. That the people who helped me, now I want to help others. And so I went to Tallahassee and I met with Senator Osgood and I met with Representative Edmonds, and I shared the story about the importance of education in prison. And they were already working on Senate Bill 62 to unlock higher education in prison. And when I got there to the Capitol, I thought these people were going to look down at me, because they come from a part of society that was a little bit different from what I've experienced. And honestly, everyone there treated me with a lot of respect and with deference because of my lived experience and because of the way that I carry myself now with education. I guess you could call it my magic power. Education has become my magic power, and it has given me access to places that I would not had access to. As Dominique knows, he had mentioned earlier, when people get out of prison, you think of them as being CDL truck drivers, flipping hamburgers, cleaning people's houses. Those are jobs. But I'm going to tell you what Dr. Mac Brown says at A. Brown Ministries when we get out. He says, get a job, get a better job, then get a career. I'm grateful that I had that first job when I got out, and I'm grateful that they promoted me. But now I'm going for that career, and that career depends on this education, and that education I'm going to use to open the doors wider for others.
Tell me, Eddie, what are you gonna, what's the career?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Today I just received word from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation, who's investing $250,000 into my education, that they are also going to pay for me to study and prepare for the law school admissions test. I want to be a policy attorney. I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to stand on those Capitol steps, and I am going to challenge our lawmakers to unlock higher education in prison. And I'm not going to stop until every one of my brothers and sisters that are incarcerated across this nation have an opportunity to go through the same change process that I did.
Wonderful. Dominique, congratulations, man. It's phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. Dominique, tell me, what's your first job, second job, career? I love that.
I love athletics. By heart, I was a track athlete when I was a little kid, and I play basketball. I'm actually a very good basketball player, but I really, my mom has a master's degree in health and physical education, and I really want to be a physical therapist. I really do. I really do. I want to be a physical therapist. I'm technically right now my major is in business administration, but I plan on continuing my education after I receive my bachelor's degree, and I'm gonna go for the physical therapist.
Excellent.
Certification.
Outstanding. We have a program at NSU.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So if we can get a GoFundMe going for you to pay for that, or maybe somebody hears what I'm saying and they're like, let's give him a scholarship for physical therapy. But we have that occupational therapy, audiology therapist. Yeah. So yeah, check it out. Check it out.
NSU is a very good school too. It's top of the line.
Yeah. But wonderful, wonderful. Here's what I want to do now. I want to actually ask Annie, Anselve Jean-Louis, my project manager, and Cameron Brown, my project manager, to please share their video if they don't mind. I can spotlight them. And Annie had put some really interesting, great comment in the chat that I would like for her to please. Let me just spotlight you now. If you don't mind, Annie, just share it with everybody live what you put in the chat. This information, this fact that's really, really interesting. This statistic.
Yeah, no problem. So I think just kind of getting ready for this webinar, like I was able to just kind of go out, do some more research, just kind of on programs like this, and just kind of the impact that they've been able to have for people. So one of the statistics that I was able to pull up, because I'm ending the YouTube chat right now, and somebody asked a question about it. So I was like, oh, let me get this and help kind of answer that. So I put it in both chats. But according to an article from Times Higher Education, the Second Chance Pell Experimental Sites Initiative, which provides need-based Pell Grants to people in state and federal prisons, enabled more than 40,000 students to enroll in higher education while incarcerated between 2016 and 2022. So even just that alone, especially you guys were talking earlier about different bills and laws and policies that have and are continuing to affect people's access to higher education while within the prison system. I think it's just really important to see that there really is a demand for it, and that there has been a good number of people that have already been able to receive the degrees thanks to programs like that, like with the Pell Grant and with that funding, and just the importance of continuing to just support programs like that so that people can continue to receive this education. Because
Yeah,
as you guys
yeah.
are talking about today, and as is just clear for anyone that really is able to receive education, it really does make a big difference.
Hey, hey, Annie, if I can just piggyback on that too. So you said 40,000 people have been able to take advantage of the Second Chance Pell Grant. But the end result of that is there's a Rand Corporation study that says that anyone who took at least one college class while incarcerated, they are 43% less likely to recidivate. What that translates into, if you're an economist or you're a Republican conservative and you care about fiscal responsibility, all of those things translate into public safety and saving taxpayers money. Because when we come out, education is one of the most critical factors for reducing the recidivism rate. And we were talking about how recidivism rates can be 70% or 36%, depending on what study you're looking at, what state you're in. But education for the longest period of time has shown that education can reduce the recidivism rate down into single digits. Single digits. And when we get down into single digits, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars that can be saved.
Yes. Great. Excellent. Excellent. Andy, do you want to tackle the chat? There's actually three big questions. No, there's more than that. Wow. There's a lot of questions. I don't know if we're going to have time for all of them, but I'm going to let you decide which ones you think we should field.
Okay, I'm gonna jump to a question that was asked earlier in the YouTube first. I see people waving, so
So good. And this can be answered by anybody. It just depends on what the question is. I think.
Can I say something, Dr. T?
Of course you can.
So, hi, I just want to add that a 4-year baccalaureate degree from Miami-Dade College is about $10,000. To house someone in Florida's prison system for 1 year is about $23,000. So just even for the conservatives, financially, it makes sense to invest in education. There are some prisons in the Northeast where it costs more to incarcerate one person than for that person to go to Princeton University. So we have become a society where we're willing to continue to fund incarceration. And you discuss the recidivism rates. The results are not positive, right? So prison alone and in and of itself does not yield a positive success rate. But when you intervene with education, like Eddie shared, you exponentially decrease the chances for recidivism. And people don't question correctional budgets, right? The state of Florida spends $3 billion a year just on our state prison system. Yet 40 to 70% of people who leave a Florida prison come back. Right? So I make the analogy, if 40 to 70% of my students fail my classes, I'm not going to have a job, right? I mean, I'm not doing a good job. Something's going wrong, right? If my students are not successful, but society doesn't question that prisons are not successful either, right? So from a fiscal, a fiscally conservative approach, it makes sense to educate people. It just goes back to this notion where people think that people in prison are not deserving of this. They see it as a privilege, a benefit that somebody waived that right to education because they ended up committing a crime. And I get that perspective, right? And none of this negates that there are real victims out there either, right? But I'm sure if you survey victims' families, they would also want there to be a purpose in someone's incarceration to make sure that we reduce victimization moving forward. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Annie, I'm going to ask you to come back, if you don't mind. I'm going to spotlight your video again and take it away. I don't know, like I said, the chat here in the webinar is blowing up. The chat in the YouTube is blowing up, which really speaks to Eddie and Dominique's presentation and presence here. How supported you guys are by our viewers, right? So Annie, take it away. Whatever you want to maybe pick 2 or 3, and then we'll go to the YouTube chat.
So yeah, honestly, there's a lot. This is the most engagement I think we've seen, at least I've seen so far on a webinar like this. So it is really great to see the just support and just people, that really are interested in learning more about programs like this. So a comment from Christopher Robley, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. So they said, thanks Dr. T and Professor Carlo, Dominique and Eddie for taking the time to share tonight. I'm curious to know what that defining moment was for both Dominique and Eddie when you realized that you were in control of your change process.
Ed, Dominique, you want to take it first, and then Eddie weigh in?
I think for me, it was, man, the realization that I don't want to be in prison no more. I want to change. I want to be something. I want to be able to take care of my family. I want to be able to take care of my people, the people who I love. I want to be able to sustain myself and not come back in this revolving door. It's tiresome. It's painful.
Yes.
It's a headache. It's traumatizing, and you're proving other people right, the ones who doubt you. Yes. So I wanted to change the narrative, and it was a perfect opportunity with the Second Chance Pell Grant, and the Miami-Dade, Professor Carlo, Dr. Brantley, and they gave me something that, that is priceless.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Eddie?
Yes, for me, that change process, the moment that I knew that I was in charge of how my life was going to go from this moment, was when I read that book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And I decided to write that letter because someone said, no, you're not going to get the education that you want. And that no empowered me to find a way. And I was this young, immature kid at that time. I was like 18, 19 years old. And next thing I know is when I wrote that letter and someone said, yes, you can. And I was like, wow, the power of this letter, doing that. It was in that fight and in that struggle that I grew up and became more mature and realized, hey, this is my path. And when it happened for me, I went and I told others out on the compound, you too can get into school, or you can get into this vocational program, and just becoming a servant leader. Because when I started serving others, that's when I opened myself up to my greatest potential.
Excellent. Excellent. And it looks like Isaac Stafford has like really great questions and actual comments here. And it looks like Professor Carlo, thank you so much. You're responding to him, but he's saying that he would love a GoFundMe or scholarship. He's got quite a lot of student debt. He was incarcerated as well, and he just graduated with a bachelor's degree with a 3.9 GPA. Isaac, unbelievable! Congratulations. That is really phenomenal. And that you started an online degree for your master's program now, which is really, really awesome. And so it really speaks to how privileged we are. We don't even realize, those of us who are so privileged, that, oh, we want to go back to school. Sure, no problem. Just, yeah, I can do it. I have access to it. Not everybody has access to it, and not everybody has the resources. And that's, I think, important for us to remember, that a lot of us walk around with privilege, that others don't. Annie, sorry. Who else?
No problem. We've got a bunch of these. We're going to go back and forth.
Yeah.
So another question that we have from Dominique Phillips, it says for Mr. McGlory specifically, but of course, if anybody would like to weigh in, then go for it. Said, what was the hardest part about reintegrating into society?
Oh, the hardest part about reintegrating, man, that was the technology. I think that's the biggest thing as far as like the education in the prison system, is that in the state of Florida, here in the state of Florida, we're like, it's a barbaric stage. We can't use computers, we're not hands-on. A lot of schools now are using the Canvas, and we can't use any of that. We're writing paper. I mean, we're writing papers, 10-page papers by hand, and 15-page papers, you know what I mean, on loose leaf paper. So it's just getting back out here. Even getting on this Zoom meeting right now was was a challenge for me.
Yeah.
But
you did it. But you
yes,
did it.
I did it. I did it.
You
You
did
can do
it.
anything you put your mind to.
And look, you both are so impressive. I mean, I'm like blown away by how articulate you are, how motivated, how passionate, how dynamic your personalities. And so, I mean, I see only success stories coming out of the Dominique's house and Eddie's house. I mean, that's what I see. I see the two of you going really, really far in your careers, in your professions, and inspiring others. Because what we're not talking about, we are talking about incarceration, what that trauma is like, and then what is reentry success like, or not succeeding, back into society. But what we haven't talked about is, how did we get here? Like what was going on back then? And I think that Tom Gainey has a really great question. And Annie, I'm sorry, I'm going to just jump in real quick. How have your attitudes toward education changed since before incarceration?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I know you were young, but were you good students beforehand? Mm-hmm. Eddie, you want to weigh in on that? And then Dominique?
So I was not a good student. I thought that I took my education for granted and was not serious about it. I was the class clown, the rebellious one. But the moment that I had to fight to get my education, the moment I had to advocate for myself and others, was when I realized just how important education is. And education is not something that in America we should be excluding people from. We should be giving them as much as we can so that individuals may be empowered and can become productive paying members into society.
Hey, listen, are you interested in running for office? Because
I would listen.
I'd be on your campaign, man.
I would love to. I would love to, but
Yeah.
unfortunately,
Well,
in the state of Florida, I cannot run for office in the state of Florida because of my felony conviction. So, but hey, but I can be a voice. I might not be able to go to the polls, but I can bring 10,000 to the polls.
Eddie, you got my vote, man. You
Yes,
got
you
my
can.
vote.
Yes, you can. Well, and there's so much, my head is exploding. Professor Carlo is reading my mind right now, because there's so much that I could say, but I want to keep my job, so I'm not going to say it. But Annie, do you have like maybe one more from the webinar that you wanted to get into, and then we'll go to Cameron?
Honestly, so many people are saying that this is hard to pick just one.
I know. I'm sorry.
You're doing a great job, Annie.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
I think I'm gonna sneak into. I'm gonna sneak into Dr. G.
You
I
go
know everybody
for it.
trying to
Yes,
leave,
you
but I'm sneaking
can.
into because they're
Go
important.
for it.
But one of them is just from Rebecca. I don't want to butcher her last name, so I'm gonna stick to Rebecca. I said, are there ever any students enrolled in these classes that feel like they won't be able to make it? And what advice do you give to those in help to help them move forward?
Professor Carlo.
Yeah, I can take that.
Okay, very good.
So picture 20 new students starting a cohort because we do a cohort model. Miami-Dade College has been intentional of embedding embedding professors and courses that give them that confidence in their first semester. So they take a student life skills course. They take I don't want to call it a remedial English, but there's an English along with their ENC 1101 that they take in their first semester to help them get readjusted, to college level or academic level writing. We have some students who haven't been in a classroom in 40 years, right? And now they're in a classroom and it happens to be in a prison. So I cannot speak more highly of our faculty who are like-minded in their support for individuals in this situation. So they don't water down their courses. They just work that much harder to make sure that students get the confidence that they need in order to continue. We have graduated thus far 61 students with their AA degree starting in January of 2021. And this past July 17, 2024, we graduated our first 13 bachelor's students in the School of Business with a degree in leadership and supervision management. We just changed the title, so I might not be getting it right. But our faculty are phenomenal, and there are people who feel like giving up. And what's phenomenal, and both Dominique and Eddie can speak to this, because they're in that cohort model, all of our students also live in a dorm together. And we always tell them, you are your brother's keeper. If someone is struggling in math and someone's great at math, get it together, help them out. If someone doesn't write as well, partner up with someone who can help proofread. And so I think our model is phenomenal because we don't do online or virtual teaching. We have faculty come in, they drive an hour, they drive an hour and a half, they come in, they're in for 2.5 hours every single week, and they're working with our students to give them that confidence. There are some who don't do great, don't do well. And so we work with those students. For some, they're not ready. So we say, okay, maybe let's start again next year. We have a student in one of our prisons who started the first semester with Dominique, right? And like 2 weeks in, he just felt very overwhelmed, was dealing with some personal issues, and he made the decision that he was going to stop. By the second semester, he wanted back in, and now he is regretting the choices to have stopped because all of his colleagues graduated in July, and now he has to continue for 2 more semesters. But that's real life. People stop and start school all the time, right? So we have had a lot of success. It's definitely over 80% our graduation rate for people who start. We have some people who end up in some sort of trouble in the prison, and so the prison will transfer them out. We don't kick students out, but if the prison removes them, then we don't have a say. I would say that's probably been 5 out of 80 students, so not that high a percentage. And then a handful have been released prior to graduating. And even Eddie was one of those, right? He needed one more class, but he found out he got paroled. So I'm like, dude, you gotta go. Like, we'll figure out this class at some
Right.
point.
How did you figure that out? What did you do?
We did. Like, the college made an exception. He was living in Tampa, and he was allowed to take his last Spanish class at a community college in Tampa, and MDC accepted those credits again so he can graduate from MDC.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I have a question, and then I'm going to ask Cameron to come on for a sort of a last licks question, if you want. The question is, Miami-Dade College has done away with the application asking if you've ever been convicted. Is that true?
That is true. And that was because of this work. We convinced our leadership to get rid of that question, and because it prevents or it discourages people from applying.
Absolutely.
And that's a decision that each college and university has to make on their own.
Yes.
So there is a ban the box movement for colleges and universities. You
Ban
could
the
start
box.
one at NSU.
I know you keep saying that, and again, my head is exploding. So there are certain things that I just can't like say out loud, but we'll talk sidebar. I did bring this to some folks, and we are not like Miami-Dade College. We have many colleges in the university, and it's just a lot of bureaucracy, but I know that they're looking at it. So we'll see. We'll see if we can get it done. But I know that Annie's got to leave. Annie, thank you for tonight. Cameron, I'm going to spotlight you so that you see, tonight is the first night that Cameron, who is a project manager, is on. And so I want to spotlight him.
Hi, how's everybody doing?
We're doing great. Go ahead. Take it away.
I love what you guys have been saying so far. I've been taking notes and just wanted to say thank you guys for coming out tonight. Wait, is my mic on? Testing. Can you guys hear?
Yeah, we hear you.
hear you.
We hear you.
All right, I have one last question from Gabriella. Her question was, what role does a mentor play in helping students return to education after setbacks and struggles they've had? And this is for both Mr. Eddie and Mr. Dominique.
I would love to answer that one. Actually, can you hear me? One of my previous roles since my release from prison was the peer mentorship program coordinator at Auburn University with the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project. I'm also a peer mentor to a group of men that are here in a Northwest Florida prison. I go in there on a regular basis, and I also go down to Miami about once a quarter. I will tell you that mentoring, especially peer mentoring, is critical because people need to know that there are people who have gone through similar situations to be able to come back in and share with them that it is possible and that they can do it, because those of us with lived experience, we know what those challenges are. And so because we are the ones that have been closest to the problem, we're also the ones that are closest to its solution. And so you've heard the saying, iron sharpens iron. That's why we go back, and that's why we mentor others, because we want to see we've succeeded with someone who mentored us. Now we want to mentor them, and peer mentoring is critical in these spaces.
If you don't mind, Dr. T, I'd like to chime in on what
I want you on this as you got the last word there on this.
And,
Go ahead.
I've never been a mentor at the prison I was at, but our education, like Professor Carlos said, we was in a setting in an open bay dorm where I'm my brother's keeper, no man left behind. And then on top of that, you have other individuals that see what we do in class and in school, and they're looking like, man, I think I could do that too. So in a way, I was taking a leadership role. Me and some of my brothers that was in the Miami-Dade cohort, we were taking a leadership role amongst the compound, and we made an example that you could be cool and get your degree. Like, you can listen to Lil Durk, you can listen to Future, and still be smart as a doctor, and know and be knowledgeable, you know what I mean, and be somebody that somebody else could look up to. And I think that's what paved the way for the next cohort that Professor Carlo had just opened up, I think that's what paved the way to set an example. It also set a standard to the staff and the other individuals, the other residents that were incarcerated at the prison.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. I tell you, tonight's show and this episode was phenomenal. I'd like to give Professor Carlo the last word, if possible, and then I'll say a few things, and then we'll end. We don't like to go over the time, but this was such an important night that we're doing it. So go ahead.
I'm just really proud of our program. You know, we've had 61 graduates, like I said, and some people might say like, oh, that's not a lot. But it's 61 more college graduates in the state of Florida who would have never, ever gotten a college education had it not been for our program. And I appreciate any support. I mean, to put a plug out there, our program does accept donations. So I can get Dr. Telesco the link through the Miami-Dade College Foundation if people feel compelled to donate. It does take resources to run this program. So I'll share that with you. And I just want people to realize that we can't forget about people who are incarcerated. 95% of people who are in prison will get out. They will be your neighbor. They will date your daughter, right? And so we can't place a permanent stigma on these individuals. We have to give them an opportunity to move past their indiscretions. And we always just believe that education is that vehicle towards empowerment. And people who maybe never, ever, ever felt proud of themselves can feel pride through this program. I'll share one anecdote from one of our students who graduated with his bachelor's in July. His name is Stanley Stovall. He's 70 plus years old. And I saw him a couple weeks ago at the prison. He's not in our program anymore. He graduated, but he shared that for the first time in his adult life, he felt pride when he graduated from college and had tears in his eyes and thanked me. And I thanked him. I'm like, it's because of students like you who are proving that this is a worthwhile endeavor. And we always put it on our students to say they are the representatives. They have to be the ones now to convince people that this is something that we need to accept on a larger scale. So I could go on forever. Don't ever give me the last word, Dr. T.
Okay.
But I will mute right now.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much, Professor Carlo. If it wasn't for you and Dr. Brantley, we wouldn't be able to have Eddie and Dominique on. I hope that the both of you will come back. Maybe we do another show next season with you guys, and we could maybe have a different kind of topic. We could talk about anything, because I really want to know what you think about a lot of things that have to do with criminal justice. You know, whether it be police brutality, whether it be abuse of authority, whether it be community policing strategies, and whatever it is that you could tell us from your empowerment perspective, I think would be really valuable to our viewers. So we'll definitely have you on again if you're interested. Thank you for being my guest tonight. One sentence to end, Dominique, and then Eddie. One sentence. Can we do that? That's hard. That's a hard one. Yeah, one sentence to end it. Go ahead. I'll come back to you. Eddie.
Yeah, come back to me.
I'm going to come back to you. One sentence. Go ahead.
Education in prison is transformative.
Excellent. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Dominique?
Changing the narrative through education.
Excellent. 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 Thank you guys really so much for being here. Bless you both. Lots of luck to both of you. You give us hope for the future. And I mean, this is like the antidote to the 70% that will recidivate. This is changing the narrative.
Yep.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here, all three of you for being here. And thank you to Professor Carlo for helping me, figure it out and getting you guys on the show. So we want to
Thank you, Dr. Telesco,
Thank you.
for having us.
Of
And thank
course.
you, Professor Carlo, for thinking of Dominic and I and allowing us to share, what this has meant to us.
Excellent.
And thank you, Professor Carlo, for standing in the gap, you and Dr. Brantley, for all these years and believing in this program and bringing on board the administrators at the college as well.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. T. Thank you, Professor Carlo. This has been a blessing.
Yes.
Truly.
Well, you've blessed us with your presence. Thank you. And I want to thank all of the students that came out, all of the PhD students, all of the undergrads at NSU, all of the Alpha Phi Sigma people. And I think that Dominique and Eddie, it's your followers too, because we have a lot of people on that are neither Alpha Phi Sigma, criminal justice at NSU, or Miami-Dade. It's your
Did
friends.
you just say Alpha Phi Sigma, the Criminal Justice Honor Society?
Yes, I did.
I worked for Dr. Regina B. Sharon, the director of Alpha Phi Sigma, for 7 years.
Awesome. Well,
that's a great program.
Now, not only are you running for office and going to kick butt on the LSAT, but you're also a great networker. I can see that already. Thank you, Cameron, for being on. Thank you for helping out. And look, next Thursday, I'm not going to go into the whole season for you because we have a lot going on, but we have national security discussion, a range of threats, with Tony Mottola and Richard Shamble. They are both PhD grads from NSU, from a PhD in criminal justice, and they're going to be talking about their book. So tune in next week, same bat channel, if you will. And thank you again. Thank you to the deans, our deans, to Dr. Durham and Dr. Kushner, Dr. Castro, all of our faculty and all of our students. So thank you, guys. We'll see you again very soon. Stay safe. Good night.
Good night.